Welcome to the Donna Sebo Show. Donna is an international mental practitioner, psychic, award-winning author, counselor, speaker, teacher, and radio television talk show personality. She brings to the airwaves talented people from around the world who share their insights and experiences with you, the listening audience. Now, let's join Donna.
Hello, and I'm so delighted you're joining me this evening. Well, if you enjoy fantasy, if you enjoy romance novels, if you enjoy the paranormal, well, I think you're going to find that my next guest, Margaret Izzard, is a woman that developed a passion for novels and actually even for writing at a very young age, and she is fulfilling a long-time dream. And oh my goodness, her series, yes, she's got a series, Stone of Love, Stone of Fear, Stone of Lust. Oh my goodness, well, we're going to find out more. Margaret, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Donna. I'm so happy to be with you today.
You have quite an amazing imagination. That's the best way I know how to put it. Yet you have done research, and when you were young, you really loved to read the romance novels, and you love storytelling. When did you decide that you were going to embark on writing a series of books? I've never met an author and I've interviewed thousands. I've never met an author that had a 5-year plan. You're quite amazing. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Actually, I didn't decide to really sit down and start writing seriously until my mid-50s. I've always wanted to write. I've told stories my entire life. I started dancing and acting at a very young age. Been involved in the performing arts throughout my entire life. And as we came out of the pandemic, I decided that it was time that I really wanted to sit down and tell some stories. I wanted to write back in my 30s, and it was before I had my triplets. And, I don't think I was, my storytelling wasn't there. My storytelling was there, but my writing technique wasn't there. I don't think I was mature enough to embark on what I wanted to accomplish. I wrote short stories. I wrote a number of different things. They didn't come out and sound the way that I wanted them to. And so I just decided that it wasn't the right time for me. So as we came out of the pandemic and, it probably came, what you could call the midlife crisis, it's now or never. And so I spent probably about 4 or 5 months researching, taking classes and seminars on writing techniques and storytelling techniques before I even wrote a single word. So when I had already had in my mind how I wanted this series to play out, it started out as a trilogy. And when I really explored these magic Iona stones and introduced not only good stones, but, 3 good stones, I introduced 3 evil stones, and the 6th stones, these magic phase stones, come together and show the Stone of Destiny. So I came up with these 7 stones. And as I developed and wrote the first 2 books, I realized very quickly that it couldn't just be a trilogy. It had to be 7 books. Each stone deserved its own story. And within the stone story, the characters find love. And so we have this paranormal romance where we have time travel, these magic phase stones. And, I just really decided that when I was going to write, I was really going to do it very well. And so that's where I've started. And I'm in the middle of that journey.
Now, you chose the environment of Scotland, and Scotland has so much history and mystery, and the love of fairies and the mystical has been a part of their legacy and heritage for literally thousands of years. Why Scotland? Why not Ireland or, some other setting? Why did you choose Scotland?
Well, Scotland has always been a very favorite destination of mine. My husband and I did finally get to travel there a year ago. But as far as, from my reading, because I've read these romances for years since my teens, and Scotland has always been a romanticized location, as you said, the history. And when I started researching, what I wanted to do with this series, I wanted a castle, a location to base this on, and this family, this clan to base it on, and I wanted to integrate these the stories of the fairies, the fae. Those are actually part of their history. Those, and these stories that are intertwined within my romance. They're actually old folk tales from Irish immigrants that immigrated to Scotland thousands of years ago. So, being able to integrate their culture and history kind of drives forward the paranormal portion of my stories. And it's been very enlightening and a whole lot of fun to write, to get to write these fairies that interact and work within the humans, and the fairies become dependent upon the humans to help them. So it's been very exciting. I think Scotland is romanticized for a very good reason, because it is a very romantic land and their history is very interesting. It's very mysterious, and it's a beautiful place to visit if anyone ever gets to go.
Well, obviously, it was something that in your mind and in your creativity became alive with an archaeological aspect to it. Now, was there a particular castle that you found in your research, because you did do research on Scotland, obviously, and when you were putting together the environment of this archaeological find, when you were doing that, there must have been something that you really found that just epitomized what you wanted in that visual.
Oh, most definitely. I chose Dunstafnage Castle, which is outside of Oban, Scotland, on the Western Isles. Oban is considered the gateway to the Western Isles. It was originally a very large Viking encampment held by the MacDougall clan, and they built Donnelly Castle in Oban. They also built Dunstafnage, which is further up the coast, outside of Oban. Within Dunstafnage, back in the 12th century, one of the lords built a chapel in the woods, and it was a private family chapel. What's very interesting about the building is that it was actually very extravagant for a private chapel. It rivals the designs at Iona Abbey and some of the other abbeys and churches that are built across Scotland. And so for a private family chapel, it is a very extravagant building. It is currently ruined. At the beginning of the first book, Stone of Love, it starts out as a ruin, and an American anthropologist comes to help remodel it. And she becomes the main love interest of the lord of the castle. This is in modern times. And during this particular part, the lord finds out that he has this duty to the fae, and hence we start the romance story. But, Brielle comes to renovate this chapel. What's interesting is the chapel in the woods is a real building. This is part of the Dunstafnage Castle compound. There's the castle. There's other outbuildings. There's the chapel. There's what's called Chapel Hill, which is a hill area over beyond the chapel that is where the original village sat, and is a potential excavation site for the Environment Society of Scotland, which is their historical society that oversees all of their historical buildings. The building now is in their possession. People can go visit it. It's open throughout the year. It's a beautiful site. In the first book, what's lovely about the first book is they do remodel the chapel, so it gets brought back to its original glory, and its original glory resembles Iona Abbey. It was modeled after Iona Abbey, so it is a beautiful building. But when I looked at it and decided that this was going to be the building was going to be this point, and the story was going to be this base of sort of storytelling that I was going to do with this fae and the magic, it really opened up a lot of opportunities with what I can do with with this building and how it impacts the story and the fae and the magic, and there's a lot of symbolism. But what's really nice is it's a real place, and I've visited it, and it does have a very mysterious aura of its own. The building itself is very magical, and the building has a tumultuous history, just like the castle. So it's all very interesting, and it's historically accurate in the books, and it's mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that was something that I wanted to bring out, because with the two books that are already out, The Stone of Love and The Stone of Fear, there is a flow that occurs with it. But Brill and Colin are the primary characters in the first book, and there is so much that, especially when it comes to the romance side, there is this that people experience, and I'll never forget interviewing one of my male authors. This was a few years back, and he had written something that involved relationships between men and women, and he said there are those situations and there are those moments when you meet someone and you know that that is the person that you are going to be spending the rest of your life with. And that sounds very dramatic and very romantic to many individuals, but it's something that has happened with many, many different people that I've crossed paths with. And it is almost as if this reincarnation aspect that you bring in comes in a very subtle way. And when they meet, there is, if you will, using a very symbolic word, electricity that's between the two of them that surprises them both. But it's there. And there's a recognition. This happens with people. And these various aspects that you bring out in the book about the Stone of Love, which is the very first one that you did, this is something that these are very, very human happenings that occur with people. But as always, we've got to have the challenges that go along with the relationships. And of course, there's a whole bunch of them in the Stone of Love. But the stones themselves, each and every one of them, have a very significant play in life. It's as if the modern world and the world of the past are just separated by a very thin veil, and there are promises, commitments, views of the future, all kinds of things that you weave in to this. The stones themselves are not all in one place. And you mentioned the fairies. This had to have been a concept that as you found it feeding into your mind, this must have been something that was just as intriguing to you to put together.
Oh yeah, like I said earlier, originally it started out as a trilogy, and and basically the concept of the stones is that the good fae, there's good fae and there's evil fae, and the evil fae are out to get the good fae stones. They have Irish names, there's Scottish names, but we'll call them, for the sake of the interview, they're good. And we do so in the book. There's good fae and evil fae. The evil fae are after the stones. The good fae scattered them in space and time. The evil fae, those are the three good stones, which is hope, faith, love. The evil fae, starting at the beginning of Stones of Iona series, the Stone of Love, starting at the beginning of that book, the evil fae created three stones to hunt the three good stones. So there's three evil stones and there's three good stones. So the evil stones hunt the good stones, and so there's this play within that of how these stones happen. But yes, each stone has its own purpose. Each stone has its own story. Each story within the stone has its own message that's designed specifically around the particular emotion that comes out of the stone. So the evil stones are fear, lust, and doubt. And of course, the Stone of Destiny is the seventh stone. So, as themes that I played with in writing, when I wrote Stone of Love, everything is about what is love and what does love mean and what is, and how does love happen. In Stone of Fear, it's all about your fears. Fears around, it's not only fears around love, but other fears that these characters may experience. And as we go further into the books, there's lust. And I call Lust one of the darkest books of the entire series. But, after I wrote Doubt, I kind of sat there and had some doubt,
Mm-hmm.
Because doubt is quite dark as well. And fear is a slightly darker tale. It does feature Marie and John, and Marie's Brielle's co-worker, and John is an assistant to Colin, the Lord. And actually what's interesting is they fell in love while Bree and Colin went back in time. So as we progress forward with the story of the stones, we start the beginning of Fear when Bree and Colin come, finalize their story. But we go forward with John and Marie, and so it starts at Happily Ever After. And then she gets kidnapped, and so their entire love story is told in flashback. So it was a challenge to write, but it was very interesting to write, and I had a great time writing it. But yeah, each stone has its purpose. Each stone has its message. And there's certain characters match certain stones for certain reasons. And that's, explored in each book.
At the very beginning of your first book, Stone of Love, there is a statement about the Fae. The Fae believed true love was powerful enough to reach between the realms of the world, even powerful enough to save a human soul. And then the Fae fables are our bedtime stories. Some tales haunt, and some make you laugh. You'll never understand them until ye are full grown, and then, my son, they'll become your sole existence. That is the play that you bring in the writing, is you introduce those slight changes, I would say, in dialect, and using the form of how people would have spoken back in those time frames, and the word of ye instead of you, this type of thing. And I think it makes for an intriguing read, because you have to do that adaptation and adjustment. This was something that I thought added a lot of character to the stories that you have, which I have in hand right now, Stone of Love and Stone of Fear. When you were writing this and you were putting these characters together, Colin is a very, very strong person. He is a person that is of what you might say an aristocratic environment of awareness and of positioning. But he's of a modern level where he is much more harmonious with the people that he works with. And this is something that, with the characters, that comes out as being very, very important as well. The relationships between the individuals and the characters in the book. And John, who is one of the people that works with him, and he's in Stone of Fear. He's got the primary positioning as well as the love of his life. So you have these various interactions with people that really make a difference. And then there's this book. There is this book that's in a glass case. And Colin is very familiar with this book, but he doesn't like Brill to read it. He doesn't. It's a very, very powerful book. Pages of writing disappear and appear, and it's quite intriguing. What stimulated that particular icon of insight into the Fae world?
The Fae Fable book. The Fae Fable book is what you're referring to. It actually sits in the study at Dunstafnage. It has a glass case. It's been sitting there for since the castle was built, so probably around the 12th century. It's been in his family for, since it was given to his family by the Fae when he was first charged, when his family was first charged with guarding the Iona Stones. At the beginning of the book, his parents have passed in a tragic car accident, and he suddenly becomes Lord, and he is unaware that he has, he knows the Fae Fable books existed, but at the time, the beginning of the book, he's unaware that he has this duty to guard these magic stones. And he never knew that the book turns pages, changes, that you can read it. And the purpose of the book is it's a Fae book. It's been written by the Fae. There are spells and incantations involved in the book, but from a writer's perspective, the Fae wrote the book. So all the spirits of the Fae that have contributed to the book, and the book contains fables. The fables tell the stories of the stones. And so the fables tell the outcome of the stories of the stones. And what's interesting, the reason that the book changes is because the spirits of all the Fae who have contributed to creating the book are still within the book. So the book at times takes on a life of its own. Sometimes it will show things, sometimes it won't. One of the book's favorite things to do is not show Colin things, and will show other people things. So it's almost, and that plays along into, how within some of the history of the fairies is the fairies like to play with humans. It's sometimes to the fairies, fate is kind of a game. They're immortal, and so, time passing is not as important to them as it is to a human. So they have a different outlook on things. And so it's from a storytelling perspective, from a writer's perspective, it introduces a number of things into the story that are part of what the Fae are and what the fable is and what the stone's purpose is. But, as far as for the characters, it's especially for Colin, it's a touch and go. But it just tells a fable of, each stone has a fable, and each fable has a telling within it, and there's a message provided in each one, and the humans have to follow the fable, read between the lines, ensure that they understand the message that's delivered, and just as in real life, things don't always turn out the way that you planned them. Sometimes you have to adapt, sometimes you have to compensate, etc. And so our characters are faced with those challenges. But the Fae Fable book is a very interesting storytelling component, and I've really enjoyed playing with it. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, I can imagine. Now, the names of the characters, many of them, the names have very, very specific definitions. Brielle, or is it Breely? And, of course, the character Colin abbreviates it to Brie, which we all know of the cheese. It's Brie. And, of course, she takes a little bit of offense. You're naming me after a cheese? But it has a certain meaning. What's the meaning of her name?
Brie. It's actually a very cute scene. I think it's a very sweet scene. He has dinner, and it's actually her ex-boyfriend that abused her that calls her, the cheese. Her name is Brielle. It's short for Gabriella. Her father's French. Her mother was Scottish, and she's eating Brie, and Colin asks her, have you ever considered shortening your name? And she said, yeah, my ex-boyfriend called me Brie, but he cracked this bad joke about it being cheese, that I was this moldy person, and he actually tells her, but wait, Brie. And, she's supposed to understand a little bit of Gaelic. Her mother's Scottish, and she doesn't quite get the connotation between Brie. And so Brie in Gaelic is Bree, which is a storm of some sort or something. And so, Colin has this very special moment with her where he changes her nickname into something positive and something more meaningful and poignant. And there's a little symbolism there, and it serves and moves the romantic portion of the story forward. But Bree means a storm, but also means, strong woman. And Colin, I don't want to totally spoil the whole scene, but, Colin has some very poignant romantic words for her.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely true. What I thought was interesting is the subtleties that you bring out in the story relative to the attitude of the men towards the women. And that was that of a very strong, protective attitude. But they did not demean the women. And in the Gaelic history, the research that has come up is that the women in those time frames, they were in an equal position with the men. There was a very strong bond, but they were not demeaned as it occurred after the component of Christianity came in. And this is something that often in history is ignored. I found it very interesting that this was a component that you brought out relative, and this was obviously both in the modern as well as in time past. But in the modern positioning, we have come, we might say, a few degrees towards recognizing the awareness that we are partners. It's not male over female or female over male. It is that communication that's very important. And you put that in with your characters and the stories. And this was very important. And I thought that is a significant. It was a very subtle but very clear implication that these were people in the story of Stone of Love and then Stone of Fear. These were characters that were really equals in many respects. They've all had the strength of personality, but they also had their vulnerabilities. And that this was a good thing for each of them to know. This is quite a fascinating perspective that you put bringing the history of the past along with the modern.
Yes, actually, thank you. I would probably attribute that component of my storytelling, because you're going to find that theme throughout all of my books. That there's this equality between men and women, especially when you encounter this relationship. And it's interesting you brought up the historical fact of it, because I have these 3 Christmas companion books that come along with the series, and in the Christmas companion books, they do not time travel. They do occur in the past. The first one, Thistle and the Mistletoe, which is coming out in November, that you do not have a copy of because it's not available yet. It's still in production, but it focuses on the couple in the past that Colin goes and book 1, Colin's assignment from the Fae to go find the Stone of Love that's been cast out in space and time. He has to go assume the identity of his identical ancestor. And so when I decided that I wanted to write a Christmas novel, I always imagined that it would be Roderick and Mary. And Roderick is the man that he assumes in the past, and Mary is his wife. Now, in the first book, Stone of Love, when Colin goes back, Mary's been stabbed, and the clan thinks that she's dead, but she's really hidden off in the hunting cabin. Roderick's been sent to purgatory by the Fae because an evil Fae was trying to get to the stone. Colin's come back in time in order to assume his identity to solve this mystery. Where's the stone and who's the evil Fae? So when I wrote the Christmas companion book, we actually go back a little bit further in time before Colin comes. So we go back a year before, and we get Mary and Roderick's courtship. What's interesting is that you will see that same theme of this partnership, and it actually develops because it's an enemies to lovers. It's an arranged marriage forced by the king to stop the clans from fighting, and she's the daughter of his clan's enemy, and he's forced to marry her, and so she has to come live with them. And in order to overcome the clan's hatred towards her, they have to have this bond, and they have to form a sort of a team, and to show that these families can live together. And it's interesting that you mentioned it, because it is part of our history, and it is having this woman in an equal role. It is part of our history, and I think, unfortunately, in this day and age, sometimes it gets a little overlooked, which is kind of strange because it's modern, and there's a lot of women that are, have careers and are very successful independently without having a relationship with a man or whatever relationship they have. But for me, personally, I think it also comes from my own marriage. I'm happily married 31 years now. We have successfully raised triplets till, they're 26 now. And it took teamwork. I mean, it literally took teamwork to get through that and to do this and to do it what we hope is successfully. They're still alive. But, I think that just from my own personal experiences, that's how I view relationships, because that's how my relationship has evolved, and I think that's a very positive aspect of any romantic relationship. And it's part of what a writer calls their voice. It will be a theme that will probably reoccur over and over again because I feel very deeply about it. But I really appreciate the fact that you recognize it and that you see it in the writing.
Oh, very much so. Very, very much so. And I think that is part of what creates what I would call the magic between the two, because it is not that attitude of, what do I want to use? The word I think I'd want to use is competition. I think so often culturally there is that has been promoted, and this is all over the world, where that is what is, and that is not what has to be. And I think any healthy relationship, there is that understanding of the partnership. And there are those times in life when one partner is going to have to take a more dominant position than the other, maybe because of illness or economic challenges. There's just, all kinds of things that can affect us in life. And so this is something that is brought out, and it is that aspect of commitment and dedication. So your 2 books that I have, and I know the others are coming out later in the year, The Stone of Love and the Stone of Fear. Now, you surprised me because when I was chatting with you before we started our conversation, I found out that you actually laid out, and I've never heard an author say this to me, and I've interviewed thousands of authors, that you laid out a 5-year plan. And that just really, really surprised me. Most authors will often say, well, I started it, I had no idea, and it may take me a year, it might take me 2 years. I've known some people that have worked on projects for 15 years before they were able to complete it because of the research that they were doing. And there's just all of these variables. And then here you are, you say, well, I have my 5-year plan, and I'm thinking I might be able to get it done in 3. And if I'm able to do that, good deal. And I went, wow, okay. So for those want-to-be authors that are out there, what would you say to them? How is it that you created a 5-year plan?
Well, I started just like you said. Those authors that start. Well, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book. And I knew it was going to be a trilogy when I started. The plan was a trilogy. And things. You discover things as you write. You discover things about yourself, the story, what you want to do, and and when it went from a trilogy to 7 books, it was like, wow, this is great. And one of the edits I was doing on the first book, we came up with the dream sequence where Colin goes back into the fairy realm, and it's shown to him as a dream, so that it explains the origin of how and why the stones came to the McDougall family way back in the 12th century, and why it's important, because his dad died before he could tell him what his hereditary duty was. So he has a fae that helps him, that's assigned to help him, and she shows him in a dream this event that happened in the 12th century. And what's interesting about that is there's these 3 shape-shifting dragons. Now, when I wrote the scene, I just threw something together of here's a great history. That looks good. Oh, it sticks on the wall. That's great. And I literally, the same day I walked away from writing the scene, I was walking through the middle of my garage, and I stopped myself because it dawned on me. It was like this, something hit my head or something, proverbially. I didn't physically hit my head, but, something, I had to stop. And I went, I've got these 3 beautiful shape-shifting dragons that change from dragon to a man. Who doesn't want to read about these men? And I realized I had another series that was dependent upon the magic stones. And, it's every time that I explore something new about these stories and this series and what can happen and how these stories can be told and what interconnects and what doesn't interconnect. And I create yet another backstory. Another backstory leads to yet another book. The Christmas companion books are all backstories. They're all stories from the past about people that we meet when these people go back in the past. And so the Christmas companion books explore those stories. So it just opened up a number of doors and avenues, and it just blew up. It was like, who wouldn't want to hear that story? I think I'm going to tell that story, and as I started pitching Stone of Love, Stone of Love was the very first book I wrote ever, and it went through hundreds of rewrites. I refused, many editors, developmental editors said, not my publishing editor, I love her, but editors before I got to my publisher said, I don't know, it's your first book. Most people don't publish their first book because it's awful writing. And it's true. Your first time you sit down to write a book, it's your first stab at it. And, I didn't, the story itself and the series, I didn't want to let go. I couldn't. I just couldn't let go of it. So I worked really hard at editing that book to get it to the level that it is, because I didn't want to lose that story. And because that story started it all. And it's the gateway into, 20 books.
Mm-hmm.
And, and how it got into 20 books was every time I wrote something that was a backstory, or every time I explained something, it created this backstory. And it's like, who doesn't want to hear that story? That's a really cool story. Mary and Roderick and how they met, it's enemies to lovers. And it was just this simple backstory that was part of book 1. It was like, well, who doesn't want to hear their story? And the second Christmas companion book is their son, and after Culloden, and it's the Dragon books. The interesting thing about the Dragon books was I was trying to pitch Stone of Love, trying to find an agent, trying to find a publisher, and someone said, maybe you should have another project, so you can have 2 projects to pitch in case you can't sell Stone of Love. So I wrote a whole book. I wrote the first dragon book, which is Damien's story. And so I wrote the first dragon shapeshifter book. And so I had two stories to pitch. I had this wonderful, sexy, sensuous man who shapeshifts, who has this dragon living inside of him, and he's immortal. And I was pitching that story, and I was pitching Colin and Brielle's story, this magic stones. And so, as I started exploring Damien's book, I wrote his brother's book, and I wrote his other brother's book. So the first three books of that series are already written. And it's just, so obviously I've been at this for 4 years, and you just keep writing. Advice to writers is, don't second guess yourself. Just put it on paper. Put it down, type it down in your computer. Put something down. You can always come back and edit it later. Stone of Love is a proof of a first draft book from someone who's never written a book and worked hard on it, edited it, worked hard on it, edited it again, and eventually found a publisher. And that opens, and it's the first book that opens up into this wonderful series. So, it's all these people who say, I'm going to write a book. Don't gonna, just write.
Gotcha.
Just do it. That's how, and that's, and so I just, I sit down and I just start writing. And, don't get me wrong, I'm not a pantser. I'm a big plotter. I'm a huge planner. I do have a muse that takes over, and we go really cool places. But sometimes I got to wheel her back in. I've had to. The nice thing about my muse is we do go really cool places, but I can't always use those scenes. But I keep them, and I've reused them in books down. I've cut 3 scenes from Stone of Love that are now rewritten and used in another book later in the series. So just keep writing. Just sit down and do it.
I agree. I think that is very important. Margaret Izzard, you have a very unique last name, and that is in your website. And people can find out about your work and your website by going to Margaret Izzard, and that's Izzard, like David, author.com. Margaret Izzard, author.com. And again, her last name is spelled Izard. It's been a delight having you as a guest. And oh my goodness, there is so much that you've got in the wheels of action, just turning like crazy. And congratulations on creating such a unique, fascinating read. And Stone of Love, Stone of Fear is available at this time. But you've got the others coming out towards the end of the year. So for those of you that love series, well, this is one you might be interested in. Margaret Izzard, thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Donna. I've really enjoyed it.
Donna Sebo here. By golly, we are going to take a quick break. I'm going to